So a little while ago, I finally had the chance to play and complete Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, the Ninja Theory developed game that was originally exclusive to the PS4 when it came out in 2017, but has since migrated everywhere, including the Switch. And now that Microsoft owns Ninja Theory, which is obviously an incredibly interesting development, that game is, I believe, available on Xbox Game Pass all the time. But I was late to the party with the game, and I thought, I've got to share my thoughts on this experience and tell you exactly why you should absolutely give Hellblade a shot. Now, I will say, before we get any further, that this video will contain minor spoilers for Hellblade in the form of the gameplay that you're seeing right now, because given the nature of the game being a linear story-driven experience that is quite short, naturally everything you're seeing you would, if you were to play the game, have experienced or will experience. So if you've played the game before, then obviously you've got nothing to worry about. If you're considering playing the game, maybe try to not pay too much attention to what's happening on screen, or just don't look at the screen. I don't know, do whatever you want. With that out of the way, I really enjoyed Hellblade for what it was. It was a fantastic, tight, compact experience that I would very much like to have more of in the industry. A lot of people, when it came out, talked about Hellblade as an example of the AA genre returning, and I think that's very interesting kind of comparison to make, and a very valid one. The game, at the end of the day, took me, I believe, around 6 hours to complete, and really isn't that large in scope. That's not to take away from the quality of it at all. Ninja Theory have crafted something exceptional with this game. The graphics are amazing, the set pieces are fantastic, the environments are fantastic, the story's fantastic, it's all wonderful. I just mean, it's not huge in scale in the way an open world game is, which happens to be one of the contributing factors to why the game is so fantastic, because in this day and age of gaming where everything's an open world, everything's a 200-hour experience, everything's grindy, everything's just bloody about looting things and exploring question marks on a map. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy doing that thing like lots of other gamers out there. I mean, I love open world games, that's true, but there's no denying that the formula is becoming stale, and that there's a lot of uninspired games that follow that particular formula of open world game that we're constantly seeing released. I'm looking at you, Ubisoft. And at the end of the day, as much as I enjoy them from time to time, it gets tiring. Thinking about these games, playing these games, it creates a huge lack of variety. And I just don't think those kind of experiences are really helping to grow or benefit the quality of products that we're getting in the industry today. Whereas things like Hellblade are heightening the kind of story experiences that we can have as a part of video games, and creating new standards for what we can expect. I don't want to talk too much in detail about what the story is necessarily, but you play as Senua, as you see in the title there, and it's about her journey as a character. That's basically all I want to say. There's a lot of kind of Norse mythology kind of thing. If you've played God of War 2018, there's a lot of that kind of thing in there too, and we get into a lot of the gods and things like that from that kind of mythos. But I'm not going to say anything more than that in fear of spoiling anything too specific. But the story was undoubtedly told in an incredibly engaging way throughout the entire thing. The way cutscenes would come in and out of gameplay very fluidly. The animations and the cutscenes look fantastic, and the performances are really wonderful as well. All the narrative presentation stuff is great across the board, 100%. The gameplay also really feeds into the narrative in a lot of ways in regards to some of the specific sections you go through, which I'm not going to be mentioning exactly. The basic core combat is kind of, I guess, what you'd expect from Ninja Theory. I've never played another Ninja Theory game before this, but I was aware of kind of the expectations surrounding what their combat is like from games like Heavenly Sword, etc. And it does very much feel like that. But having not played their other games, I can't speak to the quality of those titles. But for me personally, I found the combat to be the weakest element of the game, mainly because it was the only aspect that really felt like it wasn't up to par with AAA games. The presentation, the graphics, the story, everything else really felt like, man, this is a AAA experience. For me, the combat was the real indicator that yes, this is a AA game. This is worthy of that particular moniker. Because the combat is pretty simple. It consists of light, heavy attacks, countering attacks, and that is basically it, which is fine. I've got no particular issue with simple combat, especially, like I've said, in this day and age of really complex mechanics. But at times it can get kind of dull, although I do think to some extent that Ninja Theory is aware that it's the weakest aspect of the game, simply because you don't actually have to do it all that much, which is great. If I had to fight enemies more in this game than I actually did, it would probably be a bigger grievance of mine, but the fact that they showed restraint in that area, and I would say 70% of the time I'm not even fighting anyone, I'm just exploring, completing the puzzles, so that's why it's not a major issue, but it is frustrating at times because the camera while in combat can be inconsistent. I found that if I was kind of backed against a wall or something, the camera wouldn't really know where to look and I'd be kind of lost for a few seconds. So that aspect wasn't fantastic, but it's certainly not a major flaw by any stretch of the imagination. The title's visual look of everything, the aesthetic it goes for, with what it's trying to deliver, with the locations like I mentioned earlier, but the character models and the enemies themselves, everything's got a super creepy vibe. Just looking at it, it does very much look like a horror kind of experience, even though it isn't. It's very much a exploration, puzzle solving, story driven thing. It's not a horror game, but the art style and some of the creative choices made for the aesthetic approach of the game, it really gives a kind of creepy vibe. It's quite unique and I thought it was really great. I mentioned the puzzles and they're fine, I guess. They're not great. They're pretty simple and some of them can be, I found, a little bit frustrating. There are ones where you're trying to match symbols with things you find in the environment, and I found they weren't overly clear at times as to what you were meant to do or where you were meant to look. But to be fair, I'm a total dumbass, so I'm sure the average person would find that stuff pretty straightforward. So the puzzles were just kind of a whatever, meh kind of thing. I also just don't really find puzzles in these kind of games overly appealing anyway, so that could certainly be a little bit of a personal bias on my behalf as well. I by no means want to make it sound like the gameplay is bad. The combat's perfectly serviceable with a few issues, and the puzzles are just kind of standard to me, not really overly interesting, but again, they don't really hinder the experience that much. If you play Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, you're playing it for the experience itself, the journey that you go on with Senua and the story that unfolds as a result of it. That's why you play Hellblade, and it's obvious that's where Ninja Theory put most of their effort into the title, in focusing on the narrative experience they were trying to give to the player, and they absolutely without a doubt nailed that goal. If you're someone who hasn't played Hellblade and you're kind of looking for something different to play, you're sick of open world games, you're sick of these grindy multiplayer experiences we get these days, and you're just looking to sit down and play something in 1 or 2 sessions and experience a really well crafted story with an interesting protagonist, then I highly recommend you try out Hellblade. Like I said, it's pretty short and it's heavily discounted these days as well. And I personally just love the kind of direction it represents for the industry. I hope we get more of these kind of experiences. I just really don't need every single game I play to be substantially meaty and have X amount of content or whatever it is. The thing I value most in my games is just having a quality experience, whether that be via gameplay, via story, via whatever it is, whatever potential element of the game gives me that. That's all I want. And for me, with Hellblade, going on this ride with Senua was a fantastic experience. I highly recommend people check out. You should play Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice for those reasons. If you've played Hellblade, let me know what you think about it in the comments section down below, and if you're new to the channel, check out some of my other content, and you know, maybe consider subscribing. I'd definitely appreciate it. This has been The Backlog Strikes Back. This has been SirCazz. Farewell.